So IndyCar couldn't secure Fernando Alonso for a full season next year. Would you settle for Marcus Ericsson? Because yes, the Swede, who currently drives for Alfa Romeo Sauber in Formula One, will be driving in the IndyCar Series next year. Ironically enough, bringing the Swedish driver total to 2, as Felix Rosenqvist will also be driving in the series next year. He will be driving for Chip Ganassi Racing. Now, the reason Ericsson was looking at other series and eventually found his way into IndyCar was because next season, Alfa Romeo Sauber will be changing quite a bit. Antonio Giovinazzi as well as Kimi Räikkönen will be stepping into those seats for next season. Charles Leclerc will be leaving for Ferrari, and Marcus Ericsson will be moved to the reserve driver role, I guess what we would have called back in the day the test driver role, though he won't be doing very much seat time, I would suspect, next year. And of course, that's why he was looking for another seat, and he found one, and he will be teaming with James Hinchcliffe at the Schmidt Peterson Motorsports for next year. One of the most coveted seats in IndyCar racing. Now, obviously, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Robert Wickens. Now, make no mistake, Schmidt Peterson Motorsports was very aware of this and made it very clear that Robert Wickens still has a seat available to him at Schmidt Peterson Motorsports once he recovers from his injuries. But again, from Robert Wickens' own personal Instagram story that he posted a couple days after he made the announcement of his paralysis, that there's at least a 24-month recovery window here for him to even really have a chance of walking regularly again. This is a very long process. Schmidt Peterson Motorsports is very much aware of this, and I think everybody should be very much aware of this. He's not going to be driving next year by any stretch of the imagination. And the idea that the car number 6 is open for Wickens does not mean that car number 7, which Marcus Ericsson will be driving next year, is not the exact same equipment, the exact same team that Robert Wickens was driving for next year. Now, certainly that makes it one of the most coveted seats, like I said. That's the reason, because Robert Wickens was driving it last year and set the bar ever so high as a driver coming over from Europe. Not a whole lot of experience on American circuits, particularly on the oval circuits, but he shined. So what do we have to expect from Marcus Ericsson? Now, Marcus Ericsson, I think gets a bad rap, a worse rap than he really deserves. We have to consider the cars he has been in Formula One, and he has been able to stay in Formula One for, I think it's like 5 seasons now. He began in 2014 at Caterham, then he moved to Sauber, and certainly when you look at what Sauber and Caterham have been in the years that Marcus Ericsson has been driving Formula One, he's been in the worst car on the grid virtually every year he has driven. So you look at this year, you look at the additional funding that Alfa Romeo, Reed, Ferrari has helped out with that team. Now suddenly Ericsson is, I wouldn't necessarily say a regular contender for points, but he's certainly in the midfield and very much in the fight there. It certainly doesn't look like that Sauber is particularly worried about Williams, I guess is what I'll say. So I think Ericsson coming over into IndyCar, which obviously is not 100% a spec series, but it's much more tightly controlled. I mean, a significantly portion more tightly controlled than IndyCar or than Formula One is. So, and especially because if you look at where the team he's coming into ranks, it would almost be like him being able to take a Renault seat in Formula One, or maybe even a Red Bull seat. I think it's probably not fair to Schmidt Peterson to say it's a Renault seat. We'll say it's a Red Bull equivalent seat. Is it the best equipment completely available? No, it's not Penske, but it is a seat that is capable of getting race wins if the driver and team are clicking. Now, it'll be interesting to see how Ericsson is able to work with James Hinchcliffe. I don't think the relationship is going to be quite as fantastic as it was between Wickens and Hinchcliffe for obvious reasons. I don't know how much, if at all, Wickens and Ericsson actually know each other personally. But at the same time, I think this is an environment that Ericsson will probably flourish. Though I would say, looking at past performances and past drivers that have been in that seat, I would say My expectations are more Mikhail Aloshin, kind of closer to that performance than where we saw Robert Wickens performing at. Again, I think Wickens, even in terms of F1, was more highly touted, despite not actually being able to make any starts. I think at one point Wickens was the reserve driver for Mercedes, so that tells you a little something right there. Looking at this from a silly season perspective, certainly you look at Ericsson as the choice here, that has some domino effects and repercussions in terms of who is going where. Certainly, a lot of us thought that Ericsson was headed towards Carlin Racing. There was the rumor that they would expand to possibly 3 cars to be able to accommodate for Ericsson, then possibly as well the budgets, or at least the partial budget from Charlie Kimball, as well as obviously Max Chilton as a part owner in the team, or his dad's a part owner in the team. He was going to have a seat, no doubt about it. But it turns out Carlin Racing was at Circuit of the Americas testing with IndyCar this week, and they tested R.C. Anderson. And what's interesting about R.C. Anderson is that he hasn't been seen since, I think, Watkins Glen in 2016. It's been a while, but for those of you who don't remember, R.C. Anderson was actually incredibly quick, actually surprisingly so. I think particularly at Mid-Ohio, he was very impressive. So has he lost that? Has he kept it? Who knows? One of the reasons he hasn't been around for the last 2 years is that, unfortunately, there was a bad business deal that went down between his dad and Dale Coyne, and then I believe Dale Coyne actually ended up suing R.C. Anderson's dad. So certainly when you have a lawsuit, particularly involved with racing, that will blackball you for a little while, and I think that's what happened with RC. But we have a team willing to take him on. Now, the question will be now, would there be a third seat at Carlin Racing? I'm a little bit skeptical. I would happen to think that probably Charlie Kimball's on the way out there. If I was leaning towards one way or the other, I think the third seat is dependent on Kimball and dependent on his funding. And from what we've heard about Kimball, he has half a season's budget. So will Kimball be out of IndyCar next year? I don't believe so. Think about those numbers that he ran last year, 23. But you swap those around, and I think that's where he's going to end up next year. Meaning, I think Juncos Racing would be a great fit for Charlie Kimball. Obviously, Juncos Racing has been looking for funded drivers, and certainly it seems like they've got great connections to South America. That's partially why they're actually being able to form an IMSA team for next year. They've got that many South American drivers looking to break into American racing. We saw Alfonso Solis Jr. last year, Rene Binder from Europe coming into that team, and it wouldn't be surprising to see those drivers come in and fill out a schedule that would be headlined by Charlie Kimball, because let's keep in mind, Kimball's not really, again, he's another driver, keeping on with the Marcus Ericsson thing, that gets a bad rap. He was actually quite quick in the Carlin Racing car at Indianapolis this year, and ultimately Indianapolis is one of those races that is kind of the one that matters the most. Speaking of related issues in terms of the smaller teams on the grid and ones that are connected to Schmidt Peterson Motorsports, we can talk real quickly about Michael Shank Racing. They bought a brand new Dallara DW12 chassis. Now, is that to expand to a second car? No. They've built this car, or they bought this car with the intention to build a super speedway special specifically to race at the Indianapolis 500. As if that race matters, if you didn't believe that race matters, you can look at the investment of still a partial season team saying, you know what? We maybe would have been able to put this budget to race a few more races with a primary car, but let's build a special fast car to go out and try to win the Indianapolis 500. And you have to consider that Jack Harvey, their driver, won the Freedom 100, and he was at the front, albeit on fuel mileage, last year at the end of the race. So certainly I think Michael Shank got a taste of the potential Indy glory, and he wants an even closer taste to the milk next year. That will be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. So that was a special IndyCar silly season report. What do you think about Marcus Ericsson taking the number 6 seat, or the number 7 seat, at Schmidt Peterson Motorsports? And by the way, I would imagine that if Schmidt enters their traditional third car, By the way, I would think Oriol Servia would be first in line for that car, especially now that he's on the outs with Scuderia Corsa with the Ed Jones announcement. I would think that car would be numbered 77 going into next year. Or maybe Jay Howard. It might be Jay Howard or Oriol Servia. It would be one of those two drivers. I would be surprised if it's somebody else. But what do you think? I know some people will probably be pining for Carlos Munoz, say, well, maybe Munoz should have taken that seat. He filled in really nicely, and it was actually, I think, one of the faster cars on track at Portland when he was in that seat. And certainly, Munoz, his speciality is the oval racing, and he didn't actually get an opportunity in or on an oval track in that car. So maybe that's a bit of a disappointment. Who knows, maybe Schmidt will somehow find the funding to put a third car on the grid full-time for Munoz, but I think that's pie in the sky thinking for now. So, let me know what you think. It'll be interesting. Certainly, I think there's going to be some people coming in from outside of the IndyCar realm or the just my channel realm to talk about this, because Marcus Ericsson, of course, is a world-class star based on his exploits in Formula One. So I'd like to hear what you think, and well, I guess I'll ask, are you going to be more interested in IndyCar next year because of Marcus Ericsson racing? That will be interesting. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe for more IndyCar motorsports content, and we'll see you in the next video.